Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm gonna show you my round 1 game from the Pula Open. I faced a kid who's 9 or 10, really young and extremely good, and is a nice kid. We spoke a bit after the game, and I think he has a bright chess future in front of him. Both him and his sister played the tournament, and she may be even younger than him. It's really nice to see young kids like that do well. In any case, it was round 1. I had no idea how I was going to play. And you always dread facing a strong kid in round 1 with no preparation because their rating, could be much higher. So before round 1, we're sitting at the beach in front of the hotel where the tournament's being played. The pairings get out, and I'm playing this kid. My friend Daniel is playing a kid from Turkey, so not good pairings. So I played d4. He played knight f6, c4, and he plays the Benoni. After d5, he played b5, the Benko. And recently I've been reading a great book called Squeezing the Gambits. I'm going to leave it in the description below if you want to check it out. It's by far the best book on openings I've ever read. And in the book, the author suggests the Benko Gambit declined. And I actually made a video on the lines that the book recommends. But I messed them up in this game. So the Benko Gambit declined. The idea behind it is to keep the A file open. So you don't take the pawn, you play knight f3. And of course, black now has the option to take or to push on with b4. Those are the sidelines. But the main line is to continue with g6. And now you take. The reason you don't take immediately and after a6 go b6 is because there are some lines like the Blumenfeld you could run into with the early e6. In any case, you push on with b6 and then the a file remains closed, and the main idea, as Squeezing the Gambits suggests, is to control these two squares as much as you can. So you often play knight d2, knight c4, a4, a5, and you get a calmer game compared to the mainline accepted Benko Gambit, where you first solidify the queen side and then you play on the king side. And that's what I wanted to get. Now, I have gone over the chapter on the Benko declined. The book also goes over the Budapest, the Blumenfeld, and the Albin. So 4 openings I've been struggling with. If you're a d4 player, you're going to love the book. And black here has 2 different plans. One of them is to recapture the pawn with the knight. So eventually d6, knight d7, knight b6. Against which you go a4, a5. If they play a5, you have access to b5 with the knight on c3, and the other knight comes to c4. So those lines I've been studying a lot. But my opponent took with the queen, and I went knight c3, okay, that's fine, d6, and now I couldn't remember what to do. I knew that you could go e4, which I did do, which is fine. You could also go knight d2, knight c4 straight away. I played e4, he played bishop g7, and now I wasn't sure whether I need to play against bishop g4. So the main move here is knight d2, which I'd been considering, of course, because that's the part of the plan, get the knight to c4, play a4. So if I go knight d2, then bishop g4 doesn't make too much sense. I can go bishop e2, or even f3, which I wouldn't do, I'd go bishop e2. But castles, bishop e2 now, preventing bishop g4, knight bd7, knight c4, queen c7, bishop f4, playing against e6. And after knight b6, you go knight e3. That's how you play this position. However, during the game, I was worried about bishop g4, so I played h3 first, which is fine, but it's inaccurate. And after castles, it didn't make too much sense to me to play bishop e2 now. And I realized that I'd messed up the book suggestion of having a knight on d2 and the bishop on e2. So now I just switched plans and played like it was a normal, I don't even know what to call it, Benko declined. But I have no experience in the opening. I've only read the book a month ago, and this was the first time I'd faced the Benko, and the first time I was playing the declined variation. So I went bishop d3. Knight bd7, castles, bishop b7, and in this position I could go a4 already, and I was debating a4. Now if my opponent plays a5, then I of course gain access to b5. If they don't do anything, something like queen c7, then I probably could go bishop c4 and eventually prepare e5. So that would be my plan. But I decided to go rook e1 first and play for e5 straight away. So queen c7, playing against e5, queen e2 reinforcing e5, rook fe8. Now e5 could be tricky because of e6, so I played bishop f4 first, which I think is a good move. And I think at this point my young opponent made his first mistake. He played knight h5. I mean, the benefit of playing h3 is that I have bishop f4 unhindered. I don't have to worry about my bishop. Not that it would be a disaster to move my bishop to g5 or to d2, but now I just have the h2 square, and the knight on h5 is extremely poorly placed. Okay, now he compounded his mistake by playing e6, and at this point I think white is very close to winning material, that is, but the engine gives it as almost plus 1.5, and it's easy to understand why. He should take with the rook to reinforce d6, but he took with the pawn, which is understandable. And now I have constant pressure on d6, so I played rook a d1. And this is no longer easy to defend. He played knight b6. And here I made a mistake. I had a move that the engine says is almost game over, which is queen d2. I hadn't even considered that. So the pawn is attacked 3 times if my bishop moves away. If rook a d8, then a4, simply trying to misplace the knight. And this pawn is immune. Bishop c3 doesn't work. If bishop c3, bc3, knight a4, there's simply bishop f1, and the d6 pawn is falling. It can never move forward due to the pin on the queen. I did not see that. So instead, I played a move that the engine doesn't like, but it made a ton of sense to me, bishop c4. So the reason I played bishop c4 is to reinforce d5. And this is my bad bishop. I didn't really know what to do with this bishop. It's blocking the d-file, and I was expecting my opponent to take. If he doesn't take, I have knight g5. So knight takes, queen takes. It's still an advantage to white, but not as large. Rook a d8, rook d3, just putting pressure on d6. Queen b6. My opponent may wish to play queen b4 at some point, but I wasn't really worried about that. The b2 pawn isn't really hanging. I mean, if queen b2, then rook b1. So I played a3, preventing queen b4. I think that was a major issue. If I allow, let's say I allow it, let's say I make a random move, then queen b4, and I don't really know what to do. Obviously, I don't want to take, because my b2 pawn is hanging. I cannot take. I don't have a good square for my queen other than b3, which would be a disaster. So a3, I think, was forced. Bishop a8. Now b2 is hanging because the bishop isn't hanging. So b3, just saving my pawn. And Edward took the knight here on c3, trying to play for d5. I think that's pretty bad. Bishop c3, rook c3, and now there's no dark squared bishop, so his king could be in trouble. There's one less piece that can defend d6. He played queen b5 here, and I was really happy to see this move because now the capture doesn't really work. And I was debating between rook d1 and knight d2. Knight d2 is stronger. If he takes the queen now, then knight c4, d5, knight b6 is over because I'm threatening bishop c7 and knight a8. So for example, if d4, then knight a8, rook a8, rook c5 is winning, and if bishop b7, then bishop c7 picks up the exchange. Just c5 is hanging, bishop c7 is hanging, knight a8 is hanging. But I played rook d1, and rook d1 seemed stronger to me. It's not stronger. He played queen c4, rook c4, and e5, and he played queen takes c4 and offered the draw. I declined, of course. He played e5, and e5 is an understandable move, but it shuts down all of black's counterplay. Now d6 is such a tender target, and I have literally infinite time to target it. There is only one issue, which, I mean, I want to congratulate my opponent for finding the problem in white's position. The only problem is the d4 square. So the only thing I was worried about at this point was knight f6, d7, f8, e6, d4. And I knew that I had to reroute my pieces in time to prevent that. And I couldn't find a way to do it. So first I played rook e1, wanted to free up my knight and move my rook away from c4 to d3. I want to play f3, but I want to play f3 with my pawn defended. In case rook b8 comes, I'm going to have to play rook c3. So knight f6, good, double attack, knight d2, bishop c6. I think that's a waste of tempo, arguably. He could have gone knight d7 straight away, because the d6 pawn isn't hanging. a4. Okay, I have to prevent bishop b5. Rook b8, f3, knight d7, the knight's coming to f8, e6, and d4. Rook c3, knight f8. Okay, now I'm in time, and I can start putting pressure on the pawn. I could have gone knight c4 straight away. That was better than what I did, but everything's good at this point because the d6 pawn can no longer be defended. Rook d3, rook e d8, knight c4, and there's no way to hold on to the pawn anymore. If he goes knight e6, which was the best option, planting the knight on d4, he still loses material. Knight takes d6, knight d4, followed by bishop e5, and he is going to take rook b3, knight b3, but that's going to be hopeless. I have a protected passed pawn on the e-file. Instead of that, on knight c4, he played king f7. And now I couldn't figure out whether I should take on e5 or take on d6. Bishop e5, d5, knight e5 check, king g7, rook d8, knight c6. Should be good for me, but knight d6, king e6, for example, rook e d1 is even better in my opinion. So I took on d6. He played king e6. Now I could have gone bishop e5, bishop e5, king e5, of course, knight f7, loses the rook on d8. But I didn't want to allow any complications anymore, so I ended up actually calculating the next 7 moves correctly, which is a good thing. I normally don't do that as precisely. So there's a trick with bishop a4 in this position. And that's something you have to be aware of. If my knight's on c4, if my opponent's rook is on b4, there's bishop a4. However, if I have access to the d6 square, it doesn't work, which is what ended up happening in the game. Rook e d1, rook b4, knight c4. And now obviously the rook on d8 is hanging, so bishop a4 isn't possible yet, but once he exchanges, he can take bishop a4. Unfortunately, it fails miserably. It's just a bad move. Of course, I'm not going to take the bishop. I go rook d6 check, king e7, and rook a6. Now the bishop is hanging. If you take on b3 with the bishop, I take on e5. If you take on b3 with the rook, I take your bishop. So bishop b3 is the only move. And now knight e5 with tempo on the rook, and it's really, really over. The pawn on c5 is weak. My opponent's king is completely restricted to literally 3 squares. And yeah, it's a winning endgame. He played rook a4 and I was happy to trade. I didn't even consider anything else because the bishop and knight endgame is just very easy. I could have moved my rook, but it could have allowed counterplay, so I didn't want to do that. Rook a4, bishop a4, king f2, knight e6, king e3, bishop b5, h4. I didn't really want to allow g5 because then my opponent's knight could have been outposted on f4 in some positions. c4, king d2, knight c3, sorry, knight d4, king c3, knight e2 check, king b4, and yeah, this was the last bit of calculation. c3 doesn't work because I have knight d3 in the end. My opponent needs to move the bishop away and then, you know, lose the pawn. I take knight c4. He played c3. I took on b5, c2, knight d3. He took, and now the knight is almost trapped. King c4. I mean, the knight is trapped. He played knight a2. I played bishop f4. The knight is in a box. King e6 and king b3 was the last move of the game. So it wasn't really a clean game. I messed up the opening very badly, I would say. And he made things very easy by playing e6 and, giving me this target on d6. I think Edward needs a bit more experience in slower positions, because, allowing me to build up an attack on d6, an attack that's virtually unstoppable, is not a good idea. So I hope he learns from this game, and I hope he does great in his next tournaments. So this was my round one game. It's always a relief to win. You never know who you're going to be paired against. It could be someone significantly stronger than you with a significantly lower rating, which has happened to me before. Thank you for watching. I'll show you my round two game tomorrow, where I faced an 800 points high rated opponent than this one. Yeah. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.